Hello, I'm Geeta, and this is Swamp Watch, a weekly recap of what was accomplished by the federal government. Our federal government has been extremely busy. It's only January 2025, and already President Trump has signed 62 executive orders. The Supreme Court has issued 3 rulings. The House of Representatives has passed 11 bills, and that's in addition to 8 procedural votes. And the Senate's only passed 1 bill, but they've been really busy with confirmation hearings for the many presidential nominees. No new bills have actually been signed into law yet, but the Lake and Riley bill is expected to be signed by the president soon. So let's dive into everything that happened the week of January 20th through January 26th, 2025. I believe President Trump has set a new record for the most executive orders signed in his first week in office. Now, many of these aren't substantive, and even more will be subject to legal challenges. So I'll cover the ones that look likely to get enacted as their chances improve. There are some key actions, though, which reflect the president's priorities, including a number of orders related to the federal workforce and their location, terminations of some types of employees, removal of their security clearances, and more. Ending diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI efforts, also seems to be a top priority for the administration, and several orders have already taken effect. Now, it's not really clear how implementation will look in the final calculation, and I think agencies are a little bit confused about how to act. For example, the Air Force initially eliminated all instruction and references to the Tuskegee Airmen, the famous all-black fighting unit from World War II. But those have already been reinstated, so I think that the impact of this on the government itself is yet to be seen. Immigration orders have also been a top priority for President Trump, including the Remain in Mexico directive, orders to direct the activities of ICE, and importantly, removal on boundaries in terms of what types of locations ICE can target for removal. President Trump has removed a long-standing sort of ban on raiding schools and churches and hospitals in search of illegal immigrants, which has caused a lot of fear in the immigrant community. Also, very notably, aid to foreign countries has been suspended, including aid to Ukraine and the U.S.'s signature PEPFAR program, which combats AIDS in Africa. All refugee visas have been canceled, including those for people whose visas were already granted and they were booked on flights to come to the U.S. And that includes Afghani allies such as the translators who worked with our military. All of those people are now in limbo with their flights canceled. And the big news, maybe, is that birthright citizenship is under attack. President Trump signed an order repealing birthright citizenship, which of course was immediately met with legal challenges. So remains to be seen if he will win that fight or not, but the fight has definitely begun. There were no Supreme Court issues or rulings issued this week, but there are a few important cases that we are expecting a ruling on soon, and so we're keeping a close eye on those. Garland versus Vanderstock is one such case. It's about ghost guns. And this case centers around whether the Biden administration, specifically the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, went too far in its attempt to regulate ghost guns. What ghost guns are privately made firearms. They're assembled at home from kits people purchased online, and they're very hard to trace because they don't have serial numbers and buyers aren't subject to the same requirements as someone who's buying a traditional firearm. So arguments on that were held last year. We haven't seen a court ruling yet, but we're expecting one soon. Another key case which we might get a resolution on soon is the U.S. versus the Tennessee Attorney General. That case is about gender-affirming care, and it centers around a Tennessee law that prohibits healthcare providers from performing or administering medical treatments to a minor that would enable them to identify with or live as or purportedly identify inconsistent with the minor's sex at birth. And finally, we are expected to get a ruling soon on Stanley versus the city of Sanford, Florida. This is an ADA case, or the American Disabilities Act case, and it was brought by a former employee whose post-retirement healthcare benefits were terminated. So that's the big news coming up in the Supreme Court. Nothing yet, though. The House of Representatives is working away. They've already passed 10 substantive bills, as well as holding 8 procedural votes. The least controversial thing was a bill regarding tax laws for residents of Taiwan with U.S. income sources. And that passed with overwhelming support, 423 yay or yes votes and 1 nay. And there were 9 reps who didn't vote. So that was the only really, really easy one. The most there was a good bit of debate on, and let me talk about 2 of those in particular. The Fix Our Forests Act was introduced as a response to the wildfires raging across California and other western states. It was sponsored by Republican Representative Jack Bergman from Michigan, and it passed 279 to 141. So that's quite a bit of bipartisan support. 64 Democrats voted with Republicans to get the bill passed, including many from California. And there were 13 members of the House of Representatives that missed that vote. The Fix Our Forests Act improves forest management activities on National Forest System lands and on public lands to return resilience to overgrown, fire-prone forested lands and for other purposes. And that's what it says it's for, and it seems like it should be incontroversial, but critics say it is likely to do very little to prevent forest fires. The bill essentially allows increased logging on National Forest System lands, creating an expedited path for bypassing existing environmental regulations. It was supposedly written and introduced, at least in part, as a response to the California wildfires, but it doesn't have the strong support of Democrats, and it has been widely criticized by environmental groups. So a couple of concerns that have been raised just to keep in mind. Number one, it wouldn't have done anything to prevent the California wildfires because those were not forest fires and they weren't on federal lands. Number two, more than 70% of the acreage that's burned in western wildfires hasn't been forest. It's been grassland and scrubland, which are not impacted by these laws. And number three, Democrats unsuccessfully advocated for alternative interventions, such as hardening homes against fires by installing vent screens and perimeter plantings and sprinkler systems on the roof and in the interior. And I expect states such as California and Oregon will continue down that path, which is likely to be more effective in terms of preventing the kind of structural damage that we saw in the California wildfires. But nevertheless, it passed the House. It is expected to pass the Senate and be signed into law. And it, more than anything else, will just make it easier to conduct logging operations on federal lands. The Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act also passed the House this week. It was sponsored by Republican Representative Ann Wagner from Missouri, and it passed basically, the votes were split along party lines. It was 217 to 204, with Democrat Henry Cuellar of Texas voting with the Republicans and 11 members of the House missing the vote entirely. Infanticide, or the murder of an infant, is already a criminal offense in every U.S. state, and there was a bill passed to protect babies who are born alive, and they are actually alive, following an abortion attempt in 2002. So critics said the law is really just unnecessary, and having multiple laws with different wording on the same subject is actually confusing and harmful for healthcare practitioners. But what this law does is it kind of expands the language, saying that babies born alive following an abortion attempt must receive the same medical care as an infant, any other infant that would have been delivered at that same number of weeks of gestation. And there are already state criminal penalties in place everywhere in the United States for that situation, but it adds federal penalties on top of that. It's important to say that the situation that this law targets is really rare. There's not a lot of available data, but one study of CDC death certificates for infants born between 2003 and 2014 showed that there were just 143 deaths involving induced terminations in that entire 12-year period. and most of those involved a maternal complication or one or more congenital anomalies. Nationally, only 1.3% of abortions are performed after 20 weeks gestation, with 65% of them occurring in the first 8 weeks of pregnancy. So most babies can't be born alive following an abortion attempt just because of how early they occur. Those abortions that are induced at 21 weeks or later are usually induced in order to save the mother's life or because significant congenital anomalies are detected. So, although this was a controversial vote, it split along party lines. The actual impact of this case in terms of treatment of infants that survive an abortion attempt is likely to be minuscule. In Texas, it's been years since any such case has occurred, for example. However, opponents are concerned about this bill because they, number one, view it as grandstanding for constituents, and two, view it as an attempt to continue chipping away at existing abortion rights. Only one bill has been passed in the Senate so far, which is an amended version of the Laken-Riley Act. This bill detains people who are arrested for shoplifting or other more serious crimes and makes them eligible for deportation if they are not legally authorized migrants. In the Senate, language was added that that included the assault of a law enforcement officer or any crime that results in death or bodily injury to another to the list of things covered by the act. And it is expected to be signed into law by President Trump soon, perhaps the first law to actually be fully enacted this year, although there are still a few challenges which may prevent it from ever taking effect. The major one being court cases that are sure to be filed because it violates due process. This says somebody can be detained and deported even if they're accused of this crime. They don't have to be convicted. And then also, ICE has expressed some extreme reservations about the impact of this law being passed. They do not have the budget to carry out the law as it's written today without releasing lots of other detainees back to the streets. So, we'll see how this plays out, but it has cleared the final hurdle in Congress and it will now go to the president to be signed. Even though they haven't passed a lot of laws, the Senate has been very busy with confirmation hearings for the 1,500 or so presidential appointees, including the cabinet positions, which are key and very consequential. So far, 3 of President Trump's cabinet picks have been approved. Those were Pete Hegseth for Defense, Kristi Noem for Homeland Security, and Marco Rubio for Secretary of State. John Ratcliffe was also approved as the head of the CIA, although that's not a cabinet position. And there are a lot of controversial picks coming up for a vote this week, including Robert F. Kennedy, which might be one of the most controversial ones, as head of Health and Human Services. Also, Tulsi Gabbard for National Intelligence. Again, it's not a cabinet position, but it is a very consequential role, and this is expected to be one of the more controversial votes. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel to make sure you never miss a weekly update on what's happening in the swamp. And for more political content, you can also find us on TikTok and Instagram at answerthequestion.tv or also on our new Blue Sky account at answerthequestion.tv.